This is Now What? Life After Redundancy, when your job disappears, but you don't. Hello. I'm Stevie, and you're joining me on my journey through and hopefully past redundancy, where I'm regularly asking myself the question, now what? And this podcast is about redundancy, job searching, confidence, identity, family life, and the general business of trying to work out what happens when the version of adulthood you thought you were in quietly gets replaced with a different one. The one where you're apparently available for new possibilities, but are also somehow doing more life admin than a minor government department. It's a show for people trying to make sense of that strange chapter where work has changed, certainty's got a bit wobbly, and you're left figuring out what to do with your experience, your time, your energy, your finances, and the increasingly unhelpful part of your brain that keeps trying to solve your entire future while you're just looking for a clean shirt or wondering why there are no teaspoons left again. And today we're talking about life balance, or more specifically, the moment you realize that flexibility at work is not some fluffy modern extra. It's the thing that decides whether a role can actually fit into your life without turning the rest of it into some low-budget disaster film. Because this is one of those things that can sound a bit soft when people talk about it in abstract terms. Life balance, flexible working, work-life blend. All phrases that sound like they were tested on a panel of very calm people with matching notebooks. But when you're looking for a job while also trying to run a household, support a family, keep the week upright and remain something resembling a functioning human, flexibility stops being a philosophical preference and becomes very practical very quickly. And that's what we're getting into today. How a role can look right on paper and still be completely wrong in reality. How those details around office time, hours, and commute affect the way you should judge an opportunity. And why sometimes the best thing that can happen is being saved from a role you were trying very hard to convince yourself you'd be somehow fine to do. And as part of this episode, I'll also be speaking with the amazing Vicky Ross, who runs a professional coaching business and has a portfolio career. She's worked as a freelance associate careers consultant within corporate outplacement since the early 2000s. She brings a really useful perspective on how people weigh up opportunities and what they should be asking, and how to make career decisions at work, not just professionally but practically too. But before all of that, it would be amazing if you could take a moment, go to the place that you're listening to this podcast and rate it, review it, leave a happy thought. Because one of the key things with this podcast is supporting other people who are navigating redundancy, and the only way to get it into their ears is by people like you sharing it. So I would really appreciate you taking the time to do so. Right then, let's get into it. So, recently, I've had a role that looked right until it really didn't. And this experience kind of brought this topic home for me, because on paper, the role I was applying for was exactly the kind of role I've been looking for. It matched what I do well. I was in the right area, it looked interesting, it played to my strengths, and the salary was actually a bit above what I've been aiming for, which, as you know if you've been job searching for any length of time, creates a dangerous little surge of optimism where you briefly start acting as if the universe may finally have stopped messing about. So I applied. And as I went through the process, I started learning more about what the actual working pattern would be. And it wasn't just the polished advert version, it was the real one. It was going to be 5 days in the office. And the hours were going to be 8:30 in the morning until 6 in the evening. And the commute for me was going to be an hour and a half each way, assuming there were no major issues, no traffic disasters, and no wider collapse of the transport infrastructure, which frankly is quite generous assumption in modern Britain. The whole thing started to look less like a good opportunity and more like being slowly recruited into an endurance event. Now, before anyone says it, I know there'll be people listening thinking, well, before 2020, we all did that. We all went to offices, we all commuted, and you know what? We got on with it. And yes, broadly speaking, we did. But we also used fax machines. It doesn't mean I want one set up in the kitchen now, hissing out meeting invites and passive-aggressive memos while I'm trying to butter my toast. Well, we used to do it is not always the killer argument people think it is. Because the point isn't that office work is morally wrong or that nobody should ever commute again. I genuinely believe there is absolute value in face-to-face interaction and having regular face-to-face touchpoints. But it's once you actually lay a role like that across the structure of your life, the implications become very real very quickly. And for me, the pattern in this job would have completely wrecked the balance that my wife and I have in how we manage our house. So it wasn't just a question of whether I personally fancied a longer day. This was a question of whether the whole shape of my family could still function if one of us disappeared for that long every day, and the other one also had to travel for work. And once I properly looked at it, the answer was no, not in any feasible way that felt sustainable. But of course, I still applied because I think there's sometimes a weird value in seeing the process through and testing your own thinking. Also because part of me was still in that dangerous, hopeful phase of, well, maybe there'll be some give, maybe it won't be as rigid as it sounds, maybe this can somehow be made to work through a combination of goodwill, calendar sorcery, and me becoming a much more efficient species. But when the rejection email came through, I have never been more grateful to receive, and unfortunately, it was genuinely clarifying. Because it really highlighted to me that flexibility is not one of those things that I can nobly trade away in exchange for an otherwise good role. It isn't decorative, it is structural. It's part of what makes a role possible in the first place. And since then, every job I've looked at I've been much keener to establish that side of it early. Not because I'm trying to avoid effort or because I've become precious, but because I genuinely understand that a job can tick every single professional box and still be completely wrong for the life you actually have. So sometimes when we talk about fit, we're talking about skills, culture, pay, the progression, the sector, title, and all of that is valid. But flexibility belongs in that conversation too. It's part of the fit. Because a role or an opportunity doesn't exist in isolation. It lands in the middle of your existing life, your household, your kids, your partner's work, your energy, your commute, the 1,000 invisible pieces of infrastructure that hold a normal week together. And if a job pulls too hard on one of those threads, the whole thing can start coming apart. So that's why this matters so much in job searching. Because when you're under pressure, it's so easy to look at the headline features of a role and start persuading yourself that the rest can be managed. You tell yourself the commute is annoying but doable, the hours are long but maybe manageable, the office requirement is a lot but perhaps there's flexibility once you're in. And you start negotiating against your own reality before anyone else has even asked you to. And the trouble is, by the time you're doing that, you're often no longer assessing the role honestly, you're trying to rescue it. And I think that happens because there's a lingering cultural thing about flexibility where people can feel faintly guilty for needing it. As though saying, this has to fit around real life, is somehow less serious than saying, I'm very driven and happy to be in the office at all times. But adult life isn't built like that. For some people, flexibility means school runs. For some, it means caring responsibilities. It can mean managing health, appointments, energy, or travel. For some, it simply means wanting a role that leaves enough of you intact to still be recognizable when you get home. And all of that counts. And there's another reason that flexibility matters. It tells you something broader about how a business sees its people. Because when an organization has a thoughtful approach to hybrid working, autonomy, and trust, that usually shows up in more than just calendars. It shows up in how adults are treated, whether outcomes matter more than optics, whether managers understand that life occasionally happens on weekdays, whether a company's version of support is real or just something they say before asking you to be visible at your desk for reasons no one can quite explain. So, this isn't just about logistics, it's also about the signals. The working pattern tells you something about the culture. And I think that's why it's worth taking seriously rather than treating it like a detail you're only allowed to care about once you've proved you're ambitious enough. So with this in mind, I wanted to bring in someone who helps people navigate these kind of decisions and think properly about what fit really means. So today we're being joined by Vicky Ross, who runs a professional coaching business and has a portfolio career. She's worked as a freelance associate careers consultant within corporate outplacements since early 2000s. And the thing I was keen to explore with Vicky is essentially how people can think sensibly about flexibility, fit, and the reality of work when they're job searching. So let's go to that conversation now. Roll VT. So hi, Vicky. Thank you for joining us today. It would be absolutely fantastic if you could just provide a bit of an overview of who you are and what your background is.
Such a good question, Steve. Who I am, yes, I have to think the word unicorn is coming to mind. What I do, I guess I'm a career coach working mostly in redundancy for about 24 years, following my own redundancy, and that experience for me was incredibly positive. I had a lovely man called Hamish, who's my career coach, and I reinvented myself. And then we fast forward to today, and I'm still working in redundancy, mostly in outplacement and associate work. So working for large consultancies, helping people who have some kind of support program as they leave the company. I also do private coaching work. I do sort of climate related work. I work with groups. I love being part of a community. Historically, I worked in manufacturing, in learning and development, and a little tiny bit of HR and some IT training back in the day, before IT was even really a thing.
That is a very varied and strong skill set. So it's just fantastic to speak to you today and really appreciate it. One of the connecting threads, you mentioned that you've experienced redundancy in the past. It'd be good to understand what you remember most clearly about it and how it affected your sense of balance and capacity at the time.
My goodness, Steve. I mean, that is why I'm here today, doing what I do as a coach. Was working in a comms role in a whiskey company, and it was one of 5 production sites. And there was a merger on the horizon, and lots of chat about being taken over by Guinness at the time, I remember. And because I was in a comms role, I was kind of party to some conversations that made it quite clear that of the 5 sites, ours was likely to close. And there were 3 generations of families working on the site. There were about 3,000 jobs lost. So the closure announcement of the site came the week before Christmas. It was released to the press before it was supposed to be, and people were very, very shocked. So there were people running around screaming in the corridors. And at that point, I worked in HR. Everybody had to come together. I was part of the team of communicating what was happening and sort of sound bites and all sorts. So I had this experience of sort of partly being in a position of being responsible for how people experienced that process and what they were being told, listening to them from a management perspective, what people felt they could share and couldn't share, moving people to different sites, moving resources, all of that stuff. So it was quite shocking, but I had lots to do. And I think as that process unfolded and some people went to other sites and some people were saved, if you like, and went to other sites, and some people, took their money and ran, and we kind of got outplacement services and redundancy support in place, and that was all kind of commissioned. And I had this amazing career coach called Hamish, as I'd said, who had been a logistics director. And he had reinvented himself as a career coach. And I thought, oh my goodness, these are skills in a sense. I was already doing coaching work in the business. This is a really good application of my skills, and it's such important work when people are at their most vulnerable, feeling like the whole carpet's been pulled from under their feet, worrying about family, income, future, relevance, all of this stuff, just as I was. And he was also incredibly non-judgmental and supportive. So I would say one occasion, I need another job. I just need another job now. And I was expecting my second daughter, and my older girl was 3 maybe at the time. And then I would come in another day and say, Maybe I could look at self-employment and have a better quality of life, parenting, autonomy, variety, the things I love. To be honest, personally, I felt really chewed up and spat out. And I think a lot of people did. And I see that a lot. And almost invariably, exit processes are like a machine. And there's a degree of sensitivity required. And individuals have such different needs and experiences. So I suppose I wanted, like Hamish, I wanted to be able to support people in that really important, critical time of transition. So I became a transition queen, and I really like the not knowing of what's next that lots of people find really scary, because there's so much potential in what you might do. And it doesn't matter what you did in the past. Anything is possible. And then there's this piece of work, I think, that you have to do always around helping each other to believe that, and dealing with the kind of ups and downs, and what is possible. And no, I have to be realistic. So I banned the word realistic from my vocabulary a long time ago. I use the word useful thinking, not realistic thinking, because realistic is something that's imposed by other people and other systems.
How did you go about finding the balance of supporting yourself and supporting your co-workers and the people around you at the time? Was there a particular method that you used, or was it just something you trial by fire and you figured out as you went?
It was almost easier. It's a bit like when somebody else experiences a loss, you can't be the person experiencing it yourself. You can only help support them. So it's a bit of having both of those hats. It almost made it easier to experience the loss, because you're supporting other people. You have a job to do. And I think that, I could see that playing out across the whole site. And I see that in my sort of professional life, is people really welcome and value the support of other people experiencing what they're experiencing. That I think in the public sector, you might call it like, lived experience. And yeah, I think, and also just giving you the capacity to have different perspectives so that you're not completely immersed in the awfulness of it all the time.
Yeah.
And I think you see that with people and how they have to manage their own experience of something so it's not impacting their family too much, or there's, they have to kind of keep some of it back.
And it leads us neatly on to my next question, which is around when someone is job searching whilst they're also juggling family life. How do you see that normally showing up in the way that they approach their job search?
But I think it relates to what happens when you leave an organization. So you lose the structure and the social contact. So there's something about what's normal and referencing and having a support network so that you can check in. And that might be other people experiencing what you're experiencing, or it might be other people who are not. But you can then kind of get a yardstick, can't you, of what's normal and natural, and people will be very reassuring around, oh my goodness, no wonder you feel like that, this is happening. So there's something about that. So yeah, there's something about making sure you've got your support network, and it will be different sorts of people that you will seek out for different things. Often support in job search and a search for other opportunities, if we can look at it more broadly than that, comes from the strangest places. So I think for me, there's something about keeping an open heart, being quite expansive in terms of not judging who can and can't help you. I always remember my sister saying to me years ago, it's okay to ask for help, because as human beings, we're often, particularly in our current, world, encouraged to be incredibly self-sufficient, and it's all on you and about you. And particularly if you are maybe the only earner in the house, or historically, you've got that father on your shoulder saying you should be supporting your family, or you should be generating income, or you should have a proper job. So there's something about support networks. There's something about structure and regular evaluation. So I would normally, be asking somebody if they were sort of maybe doing a Friday or a Monday check-in with themselves. What have I achieved this week? What have I avoided? What do I need to focus on? Are there conversations I could be having? Have I gone out for a walk? So, like thinking about your mental health, your physical health. Have I got somebody I can just be a mess to? Is there somebody that can be my kind of like prod and poke me as an advocate? So I think it comes back to
Yeah.
people, networks, and I think some structure that you might have had at work around definition of what you do and how you do it, that you need to build for yourself. But you can learn from other people really effectively.
I'm curious whether you see people being particularly hard on themselves when they're going through this process.
Yes, absolutely. But it feels like that's one of many, many, many things. And what was interesting is if you go back to the change curve and the ups and downs of the impact of any change, whether it's the loss of your car keys and catastrophizing around that, or the loss of somebody in your life or the loss of your job. I think people experience things so differently, don't they?
One of the things that I'm trying to explore in this particular episode is that gap between how roles and opportunities are being advertised and how they turn out in reality.
So there does seem to be a push in the market back to, our people are at work 3 days a week. And it feels like a kind of a stricter structure, exercise. So I think I would be seeking out organisations that showcase and advertise their flexibility. So I'm thinking not about jobs specifically, but more about a job search strategy or exploring where you might find a good fit for your needs. There's a contradiction, I think, between organisations and how they advertise and what they need and how recruiters manage all of that and a kind of machine. And then what the individual on the outside now, because you're not part of the company, you're on the outside looking in now, and what you need. And the real opportunity is to think, I have choices. I can choose what I do next. And it doesn't often feel like that. Sometimes it's a bit like, oh, I've just got to get sorted. But you have so much more freedom than somebody who's golden handcuffed into a job. So I think there's something really interesting there about how something might be advertised. It may not be real at all, or represent reality. It may be an advert that's just been used forever. It may not represent the current state of play because it was written 3 weeks ago. So there's always an opportunity to explore flexibility with somebody. So if you say, what is really going on for you? What is it you really need? Does the team really need? What's working? What's not? What are you trying to build on or develop? So these are the questions I think that lead to a much more flexible, consultative approach where you can say, I'm not attached to a permanent job. I mean, you may want one, but you might say, let's look at 18 months of contracting because I can help you with this, but you may not want to increase headcount or whatever. So that's where the flexibility comes from. And you're at your strongest negotiating point when you've been offered something or somebody says, oh my goodness, yeah, we absolutely need your help with that. It might not be a formal offer. It might be a conversational signal to say, absolutely, if you could sort that out for me, that would be fantastic. But there isn't, somebody might then sort of caveat that by saying, but we haven't got headcount and there isn't a huge budget. And your job is to work it out with that person. Who else do we need to influence or talk to, or who are the other stakeholders, or how could we finance that piece of work that we want to do together? So it's that thinking for me that's the difference between the sort of traditional job search and how things might be presented on the outside. But start always with organisations that are saying that they're flexible, and then you have to test it. Is that the reality when you talk to other people?
Right. You've made me think more around kind of that flexibility and approach and that searching for the right fit for the individual. It would be good to get your view on how that balance could be established. So from an individual's perspective, when they're trying to view up an opportunity and how that works in terms of what that business or what that role is requiring of them, do you have an opinion on how that balance can be assessed and how someone can make the call as to how it should work?
I think it comes back to assumptions about what's fixed and absolute and real or not. And I think maybe perhaps in my mind, and as a freelancer for all these years, always about potential. And on the outside, things never seem possible or real or the right fit. You need to ask yourself, do I know enough yet? So it's a post-it that I always suggest to people that you stick above your laptop. And the answer is always no. So, you keep rummaging, keep exploring, keep researching. Do you really know anything about this opportunity yet? Are you making assumptions to either run away from or to kind of hook your wagon to without really knowing enough yet? And there's so much research you can do, particularly around, talking to people on LinkedIn and talking about culture and context. What's it like to work there really? You've been there for 30 years, you've been there for 3 years, you've just joined. Would you talk to me about your experience? And you will get people ghosting you and ignoring you, but you will get people talking to you as well. And I think there's something about keep testing, but there's also this element of your flexibility. So you don't have to accept what seems on the face of it to be a job with certain terms and conditions. You can negotiate. People do all the time. And in fact, statistically, organizations respect people more, apparently, for negotiating. There will be times when it is what it is, and you're getting into a situation. I think there's a whole question about compromise, Steve, here as well. You have to know what your walking away point is. You have to know what things you will or won't compromise. It's not all on you to make the decision either. And there may be things that, rationally, you may say, well, here are the things that are important to me. You might have done your assessment work, strengths, skills, needs, values, whatever. This is what I had before. This is what I want more of. Then there's a whole emotional content, and then there's the system. Isn't there a wider family system? Maybe the value system, maybe a bigger system than that, even in terms of the sort of work you want more of and how difficult that might be to get relatively in your own mind because it's different from what you've had before.
Thinking about kind of how individuals interact with LinkedIn, which I know is one of your specialist areas, have you got any thoughts around ways that folk could job search realistically when their own bandwidth is potentially lower than they expect it to be?
One of the things about sort of getting your sleeves rolled up, and whether you like LinkedIn or you hate it, is kind of overcoming any resistance to social media. There are lots of interesting things you can do with the platform, and you can get it working for you. So sometimes I've said in the past, it's almost like you can have an avatar of yourself sort of doing the publicity, and you can be, having a walk with a dog in the background. Or so if you put the work in up front with LinkedIn, and that's about, it's horrible, isn't it, this expression, personal branding, but who am I? How do I show up? What's my voice? What's my opinion about things? Who do I want to be speaking to? These kinds of questions. And shaping your LinkedIn that way. Once you've done that, and you can tweak it, and it will change as time goes on, as you think differently about what you want to do next and what that might be. But it's kind of doing the work for you. And I think LinkedIn as a sort of soft networking tool can be super helpful. And you can be doing lots of rummaging quietly in the background. Practically using the search bar on LinkedIn. So forget Google, just for the next few weeks, use the search bar on LinkedIn to research anything, any idea, subject at all. And that will help you to have a much better conversation with the LinkedIn AI, which is called 360 Brew, BREW. And as you have a more useful conversation with the mechanics of LinkedIn, then it will work better for you. And you can influence that. The more you chat to LinkedIn in the search bar, the better the outcome will be for you. So I think if you've got low bandwidth, sitting in front of the telly, just whatever ideas or thoughts or keywords, stick them in the search bar on your LinkedIn, and almost like LinkedIn will be working for you in the background there.
That's great. I'm scribbling that down, definitely.
Well, good. And it's, could be when you're waiting for the kids outside school, just a couple of minutes. And I think the other thing would be, if there are events where you might come across other people going through this process, let them take the weight of the thinking for a while. And you don't have to have all the answers or all the solutions. Sometimes it might just be about listening, or maybe some upskilling and some training. And the interesting thing about transition is it's not a quick fix instant thing. You need to reflect and ponder and, have ups and downs. It's all part of the process. Push, pull, looking forward, looking back. This question of low bandwidth I think is a really important question, isn't it? Because with all of the with all of the many layers of the onion of the world, and and family and everything else that's going on, there's so much demanding of us. And job search can feel like really heavy, hard work.
How would you support someone with that kind of dichotomy of thought that I'm exhausted, which then means I'm not capable, or that kind of thing?
Well, what comes to mind immediately is a Scottish expression, which is "what's for you will not go by you." What's for you will not go by you. And that's the kind of like, if you don't rush at it, it'll come in its own good time. And that's borne out actually statistically. People who spend more time in job search, career opportunities, career development, statistically get a better quality outcome, because they've taken time to reflect and to stop. So there's something about slow down, be patient, compassion, self-compassion, do what you need to do, what's right for you. If you might have a day where you think, I really can't see CVs far enough, I certainly do. I've done lots of time. In fact, I've had to find ways of making CVs fun in order to make them bearable. And it might be that you have a day or a couple of days, or even it might even be a week where you run, you go to the theatre, you walk the dog, you cook, all the things in terms of mental health and well-being that are good for you, and then you can come back to the process fresh. There's definitely something about in transition, particularly from a job, that has an impact on self-esteem, and you often worry about. And I'll do it, if I'm coming off one contract or piece of work as well. Do I have what's needed or required? Will anybody take me seriously? Am I credible at all? Or, do I have the right skills? All these questions that kind of cut, all these doubts, imposter syndrome, isn't it? But again, back to this too will pass, or tomorrow. Tomorrow is a fresh day. Every day is that. There's lots of expressions, aren't there?
Yeah.
And I would say, if I was saying I've got 2 girls, if I was saying to them, I would say, it'll be better in the morning. So sleep on it. It's always good to sleep on it. Because I was thinking about because when you lose your job, it is a loss. There's a bereavement process. There's grief associated with identity, security, income, all sorts of stuff, and it throws out all sorts of other losses. Typically, you'll have people don't just suffer the loss of their job; they suffer loss of things that they just haven't dealt with in the past. Perhaps often come up, or all sorts of weird worries, and it kind of gets in the way often of other plans. But then you've got around you, you've got maybe you've got children who are worrying, and then it affects relationships as well in terms of kind of whispered conversations in the kitchen. So there's all sorts of interesting stuff there around, impact and happiness and ups and downs. And one of the lessons from being freelance all these years is that you can make changes yourself. You're not dependent on somebody else like you are when you're in an employment situation. There's this kind of boundary, isn't there? This is what you're here to do. This is, there are rules. The thing about, that I've experienced about being freelance is that, the positive thing, although it's insecure, is that you always ask yourself, okay, what can I do to change this? And so that helps you with the thinking.
One final question. So one of the questions I'm asking all of the guests I have on the show is, in their past experience of interviews, whether they have a least favorite interview question.
You see, I would be thinking less about interviews and more about sort of general networking conversation with my It's All About Networking hat. It's really hard to answer because for me, almost every question there's some element of curiosity. But there's a question that historically I've heard coming up, which is, is a tomato a fruit or a vegetable? Discuss, like a weird question. Or I think there was a question like, is a fish a bicycle? Or can a fish use a bicycle or something? I'm trying to remember. So weird kind of nonsensical questions which don't help the interviewer or the interviewee. But for me, they would be, oh, that's an interesting question. I wonder what's the reason for asking the question? So I would generally ask if there's no context.
Yeah.
Or questions about detail. Spreadsheets, numbers, anything related to detail, and would maybe make me squirm slightly in my chair.
And I've got to say that if I am in an interview anytime soon and they ask me kind of fish, what's the difference between a fish and a bicycle? My response is going to be to panic. It feels like there is suddenly a new test that I was not expecting in the slightest. So if you've ever had that experience, I salute you for managing to get through it.
So the trick is not to panic. The trick is to catch yourself in that response and flip it into, that's an interesting question. Tell me more about why you're asking me that question.
I like it. Very good.
Fantastic.
Brilliant. Well, Vicky, thank you so much for joining us. It's really, really appreciated. And hope to hear from you again.
Brilliant. Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been really interesting chatting to you. So thank you.
That was Vicky, and I'm supremely grateful for her perspective. And I wanted to finish this episode with some practical things that have helped me think more clearly about this topic. And I have to stress, this isn't a perfect system. It's not a one-time exercise where you emerge holding a laminated answer sheet and glowing with confidence. It's quite simply a few ways of pressure testing whether a role that you're looking at genuinely works for your life before you find yourself doing elaborate mental maths in the shower trying to work out whether you could technically be in two places at once. You can't, by the way. The first thing is to look for evidence beyond the advert. Because a job advert is the sales brochure. It's the estate agent listing, and it's the part where everything sounds airy and positive and conveniently low on specifics. If a company says it's offering hybrid working or flexibility, I think it's worthwhile trying to find signs of what that means in real life. Now, that can include looking at Glassdoor and similar places where people talk about their actual experience of working for that organization. And you can't treat every review as gospel, obviously. Some people write workplace reviews as if they were settling ancient blood feuds. But patterns are useful. If multiple people are mentioning rigid management, presenteeism, long office hours, and poor flexibility, it's worth being aware of. Equally, if people consistently talk about trust, autonomy, and realistic working arrangements, that's telling you something too. The second thing is to be specific with yourself before you are specific with anyone else. And by that, I mean work out what you actually need to be present in your life. And it's not the ideal version, it's the real one. For me, one of the big questions is always whether I can do one end of my children's daily routine. If a role means I can't reasonably do a drop-off or pick-up, it's going to matter, and it is not a vague preference. It's part of how our household functions. And it's so important because flexibility can be so broad that it stops being useful unless you translate it into real life. What are your actual pressure points? What has to work? Where are the moments in the week that cannot just be absorbed by goodwill and optimism? Once you know that, it becomes much easier to judge whether a role is going to be workable or whether you're simply admiring it from a safe distance. And the third thing is around asking about flexibility at the right level of detail at the right stage. Now, I could be wrong here. I don't think you need to unload your full domestic operating manual in the first conversation. Nobody needs to hear a detailed account of your next 5 dentist appointments, the swimming rota, and the fact your bin collection has become emotionally significant. That's not what this is. But I do think there is real value in asking high-level questions reasonably early, especially with recruiters or in initial conversations. Things like, how does the business balance in-person and remote working in practice? Is the office expectation fixed? How much autonomy do people tend to have over their week? Those questions are normal, they're sensible, and they can be revealing. Then if the process progresses and the role becomes a serious possibility, that's where you can get into more specifics with a hiring manager. Because by then you're not kicking the tires, you're trying to establish whether this can genuinely work on both sides. So for me, the principle is start broad early and then get more concrete when mutual interest is established. You don't need to make it weirdly personal too soon, but you also don't want to drift all the other way to the offer stage, still hoping that flexibility means something that it doesn't. The fourth thing is to work out in advance which of your needs would drop first if your back's against the wall. And it sounds bleak, but I think it's kind of useful. Because when you do this honestly, you start to see both your fallback options and your absolute red lines. If you need to be available at 3:30 for a school pickup, for example, what are the possible workarounds? Is there an after-school club? Are there friends and family available to do pickup for you? Have you got shared cover with your partner? Is there a local arrangement? A complicated barter system involving snacks and favours? Would you need to take up forest hermitry and remove yourself from society altogether? You don't necessarily need to like the options, but mapping them out is going to help. Because if there are realistic ways to accommodate a pressure point occasionally, that tells you one thing. If there are absolutely no workable alternatives at all, that's telling you something else, and it helps you establish what's inconvenient, what's negotiable, and what's genuinely a hard stop. Not every flexibility need sits at the same level. Some of them are going to be preferences, some of them are supportable with planning, but some are non-negotiable. And if you don't know which is which, it's much easier to slide into a role hoping you'll somehow sort it later. And the fifth thing is paying attention to your own reaction when you picture the role within a real week. And this one's a bit less scientific, but I kind of think it's important to think about. When you imagine yourself doing the job as it's actually structured, what happens? Do you feel stretched but interested? Do you immediately start mentally rearranging your entire household and bargaining with reality? Because the reaction can be telling you something. In my case, with the role I mentioned earlier, once I pictured the actual hours, the actual commute, and the impact it was going to have on my family, I wasn't thinking, yes, this is an exciting role. I was thinking, right, so this would require a complete re-engineering of our week and a level of transport optimism usually only seen in disaster planning. And that gave me a really strong steer about whether or not I actually wanted that particular role. And I think the broader point in all of this is that flexibility isn't a side conversation. It's part of what determines whether a role is sustainable, which means establishing it properly is not awkward or demanding or evidence of laziness. It's due diligence. It's just you trying to work out whether this role is fitting the life you already have. And that's a really important thing to do. So what's the takeaway? A role can look right on paper, but still be wrong for you. And flexibility is often the thing that reveals the difference. Now, that doesn't make flexibility a nice to have, it makes it part of your assessment. You're establishing whether it fits, and it's part of what tells you whether the opportunity is genuinely workable or whether you're going to have to spend 6 months pretending a structural problem is just a diary issue. And the one thing I'd encourage you to do is take one role that you're looking at and pressure test that flexibility properly. Not vaguely, but look behind the advert. Think about what your week is actually going to require of you and ask some sensible questions early enough that you can learn something before you get emotionally attached to the opportunity. Thank you, as always, for spending this time with me, and a huge thank you to Vicky Ross for contributing to this episode and sharing her perspective. It really adds something valuable to this conversation. If this episode has been helpful for you, I would supremely appreciate you supporting the show by following it, subscribing, sharing it with someone who may need it, getting some stickers printed, I don't know. Leaving a rating or genuinely helping others find it who are navigating redundancy is massively helpful. And with that, I'm off to continue living in a world where we're apparently meant to be nostalgic for a time when the office was compulsory, commuting was noble, and important messages arrived with the gentle dignity of a fax machine. Until next time, if you're asking yourself now what, you're in the right place. Before you go, it's a quick favour. If you like this episode, please hit follow or subscribe. I know every podcast says that, but apparently it actually does something to the mysterious algorithms, and it helps me pretend I'm not just talking to my kettle. So go on, give it a tap.